Well, good afternoon, committee. Welcome. We are going to take a look, an informational hearing at a constitutional amendment to limit property valuations. I know that we've seen this before in the Senate, and I appreciate the Senate President for letting us meet this afternoon. We will take a quick minute. If Amelia's ready to give us not yet? Okay, she wants to give us a minute. And all of you do have the handout. It was emailed out. Committee, this hearing is going to work a little different. We do have the document in front of us, and I will ask Amelia for an overview. We will hear from conferees, and we will consider any recommendations for changes to this and going forward. Definitely a team effort, guys. This is not... It's one of the biggest issues we hear about is property taxes. And so we need to make sure that we get this right, and hopefully the House will pick it up tomorrow. Thank you, Amelia.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The draft that you have before you in the right-hand corner should read 2024 RS 0014, and this is for the special session of 2024. And just as a reminder, this is still a draft. We don't have bills today because we're not in session yet. The draft Senate concurrent resolution that's designated as 2024 RS 0014 for the special session of 2024 is a proposition to amend Section 1 of Article 11 of the Kansas Constitution relating to property taxation. The resolution proposes to limit annual valuation increases of real property, except in certain circumstances. For the assessment and taxation of property on or after January 1 of 2025, the amendment would provide that the final taxable appraised value of any real property shall not increase by more than 4% or a lesser percentage if provided by law in any taxable year except when one of the following items happens. If the property includes new construction or improvements have been made to the property, the class or subclass of the property changes, the property becomes disqualified from exemption, the property is first listed as escaped or omitted property, or an error is corrected, the legal description of the land lot or parcel changes, or title to the property is transferred, changed, or conveyed to another person or entity. Further, the legislature may define new construction or improvements by law and enact other legislation to administer the provision. Also, all or any portion of the benefits of a valuation limitation may be portable or transferable under certain circumstances as defined and provided by state statute. The proposed amendment would be submitted to the electors at the November 24 general election unless a special election is called at a sooner date, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee questions? Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy summer, everybody. Quick question. I know we don't have actual language in front of us, but going back to the language that passed the Kansas Senate, I believe, in the 2023 session, there was concern stated about this amendment potentially invalidating the current use value appraisal method for agriculture land. Did that amendment specifically repeal, is it Article 11, Section 1 of the Constitution or anything? And maybe that's a question we'll have later for KLA, but I'm just curious to how is this amendment going to affect agriculture as it's evaluated today?
Maybe if I may, it does not repeal that section. It does not impact that section, but it does bring them under the 4% limit as every property class would be.
Thank you for that clarification, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Chairwoman Tyson, and thanks, Amelia. With regard to the improvements, as you said, that would be part of statute, so that would be developed probably in the next actual session, because we don't want somebody to paint a house just as regular maintenance and then get an increase in property tax for that sort of thing.
Amelia?
Actually, the way this is currently drafted, there would be at least 1 year probably that 2025 that possibly could be a situation where there wouldn't be a statutory definition, that might be a situation where they would have, those who implement the provision would have to decide how to do that. But obviously, yes, there's language in here that the legislature can come in and define that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Our first conferee is Dave Trobert. Welcome to the Senate Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave Trobert, Kansas Policy Institute. I was sitting in the back there thinking what I was going to say, and after the previous hearing, and it reminded me of an old joke Henny Youngman used to say. The comedians would go to the summer resorts so frequently and tell the same jokes, they would just get up there and say, number 38, and everybody'd laugh. So I kind of feel like that here. So I'm not going to go through a lot of the same stuff that I spoke about earlier. The constitutional amendment, I'm not a lawyer, certainly not a reviser, but as we understand it, a constitutional amendment would not affect anything other than what it says. So like it wouldn't affect an assessment ratio that's elsewhere in the Constitution. It wouldn't impact statutory issues that, like, for example, there is, I think it was 2 years ago maybe, we passed a bill that said valuations couldn't increase for routine maintenance. So there's already that in there. I don't know.
Actually, that was in 2022 when we passed that language. It was in SB 13 in 2022.
Okay.
And we passed it in 2021.
So, I mean, I understand there's concerns, and one of them is certainly very legitimate. We're not completely comfortable with somebody buying a house and paying more tax than the person next to them with a similar house, and yet that would be a conscious decision. They would go in at least knowing that was going to happen. But when we look at the totality of what's happening, with the alternative being we do nothing, then we're seeing people getting taxed out of their homes mostly because of excessive valuations, and secondarily because local government officials in most cases are taking advantage of that to raise double-digit property tax increases. You've seen the valuation examples, the tax examples. This isn't perfect, but we see that as the next step. By no means would this be doing everything we need to do on property tax, but it seems like the very logical next step to us. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Dave. I think you gave compelling testimony for it in the previous hearing, so much appreciated. Representative Corbett.
As I was out in the hall listening to some other conversations, is there any downside to this constitutional amendment that I'm not hearing or seeing? I can't see any, but you kind of hear people who are on the fence on that saying, well, there's a cliff there. There's some reason this won't work, but it affects both business and residential, correct?
Yes, it would affect all classes of property.
So you'd think the chamber would jump on this be eager to support it, I would think.
You know, I can't speak to the chamber's position, Representative. I could see where someone would say they're nervous about a valuation, but to say that it's going to be a disaster, there's states all around the country that have varying degrees of limitations, and that hasn't led to disasters.
This happens, Florida has a pretty good program similar to this, where your taxes are maybe somewhat frozen unless you want to move or upgrade your house. So I know people that live there that come and see me, they'd like to get a better house, but they don't want to lose the tax break they've got where they're at. So it kind of lets you self-inflict your own degree of pain.
That's a free market decision.
And if I may, we address that issue or that concern, alleviate it, or at least mitigate it by putting in the allowability for transferability. And that would help, and that would be defined by the legislature in statute. Any other questions? Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does any state in the union have anything similar to what's being proposed in this current resolution or constitutional amendment?
You know, I haven't studied them all. I know there are several. The most famous is probably Proposition 1 in California that's been in place for decades, and people love it. Yes, there are some, it's not fair and so forth, but when you look at the alternative, everybody be paying a heck of a lot more. So the valuation, and again, this doesn't restrict anybody from raising tax. So this has no impact on local government's ability to raise tax, none whatsoever. It helps mitigate the increase from valuations on property holders.
I'm trying to understand why Colorado has such low property taxes. If anybody can help me understand why, I'd be curious. But I think they have multiple caps on property. I think there's even a ballot initiative potentially going to the voters to lower what can, I think the increase, I think is currently 5.5% in terms of property tax increase, and trying to lower it to 4%. And maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just curious what other methods we can explore as well, just because it's clearly working in some states and it's able to keep property taxes low. And Colorado seems to be someone that has it right.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Colorado, Senator, but the other big factor that affects property taxes is the size of government you're funding. And Kansas is next to last in the country in the ratio of local government employees to population. And if we were just at the national average, we'd have about 38,000 fewer local government employees. So if the all-in cost of a average pay, benefits, taxes, and everything, if that was just $50,000, that's about $2 billion in property tax that we wouldn't be paying if we were sized at the national average. So the one thing that probably impacts in Colorado is they don't have as big of a local government structure as we do.
So I would, another item that impacts Colorado is they do have Tabor, and the property taxes are part of that equation. They also have a freeze for seniors that have owned their home over 10 years. They have some restrictions there. So they do have a few other programs that we don't have. I would look, there's Oregon and Oklahoma that have limits that this was kind of based off of, but there's approximately 18 states in the nation that have valuation limits. So Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dave. I just want to kind of add to some of the testimony that you had in the last committee meeting with regard to these county revenue neutral rate meetings. And I was attending the one in Johnson County. There's a myriad of people showed up, gave all sorts of empirical data as why this was just out of whack valuation-wise. And it went for hours. And it was very clear that the minds of the county commissioners were already made up. They weren't listening to the taxpayers, the homeowners, the people actually they're begging not to run them out of their homes because they were being taxed out of their homes. And I believe firmly after witnessing that that the state level has to step in. Maybe that is not epidemic across the state, but it's certainly what I saw in Johnson County, and they're just not listening. And so I think this is a good step toward that, waking up these local governments that they've got to rein in their spending. They've got to do something to help these homeowners, and they can't continue to let their pleas fall on deaf ears. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, any other questions? Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
Our next conferee is Linnell Griffith. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today. As you know, we Kansans are suffering under rising taxes, and one of the most attractive reasons, I believe, for living in Kansas is the comparatively lower cost of living, housing included. But as property taxes, whether you own or rent, increase, it negates this benefit. And as just a normal citizen, just an everyday person, I am begging you all that the government will represent us well and, as needed, cut spending so you can lower our taxes. And, Kansas has an excess of funds, so it really should be able to get that done. We need some tax relief. This 4% or less cap annually is just a modest effort, and it's not too much for us to ask from our elected officials. You represent us. According to a news story from ABC World News just yesterday, there are caps being considered in Colorado, Georgia, and Nebraska, and Idaho and Michigan are eliminating property taxes, may eliminate it altogether. Senator Tyson, you mentioned 18 states that also already have some sort of guardrails in place like this. We're not alone in this. Please listen that the people really, really do need this. Just everyday people do not have the time and energy to monitor legislation and reach out to their elected officials and come and testify like paid lobbyists do. So I would hope that you would really give the weight of just regular citizens, give our testimony a lot of weight, because I've been to those revenue neutral rate hearings, and I've seen the people beg, and I've seen the commissioners go, we'll raise it anyway. All right. And I've got the calls from people who have said, I'm moving out of the county because I can't afford the increase in property taxes. And it is heartbreaking. We're just citizens, for the most part, trying to live peacefully, work hard, and support ourselves, but we need this tax relief. For me, it may be, it's definitely less discretionary spending, but for others, it's deciding between medicine and food and even getting to stay in their home, and that is absolutely heartbreaking. So I'm telling you that those who you represent, they're hurt, most of them, by out-of-control taxes, especially rising taxes on which we already own. The ability to acquire, keep, and sell private property is a basic human right against theft. It's a mark of a free people. But if the government can increase what we owe to keep what we already have, that's wrong, especially when there's no guardrails there. It's no wonder people get so upset about property taxes. At the minimum, the people of Kansas need a cap on these increases. And I hope that you all decide for tax relief in various forms, this and others, so that you represent with the consent of the governed and not lobbyists and special interests. Thank you. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Linnell, I want to thank you for fighting the good fight and being here. And for those of you that missed it, Linnell was on national television this weekend, ABC News, fighting for property tax and lower for aid for Kansans. So thank you, Linnell.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you
appreciated.
so much. And people across the nation are begging for property tax relief. Thank you.
Thank you. committee. Our next conferee is Mike Steiben. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
It's Steben.
Say that every time. And
It's
neighbor.
German.
I see neighbor, and yes, and you're limping.
Yeah, a little bit. I've been sitting a long time. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I do always want to express to folks that were handling the relief for the tornado victims in Douglas and Leavenworth County, especially Senator Tyson and others, for your support for the relief for outbuilding folks. They lost their homes, and then they had their outbuildings destroyed, and we couldn't abate the taxes on the outbuildings, and you got the job done. Thank you very much. You've helped a lot of people, and the commissioners have granted a lot of those abatements. I just want to say that. I'm here today. I was here during the regular session on SCR 1611, and my name is Mike Steben. I'm a county commissioner from Leavenworth County, and today I'm here to present a signed letter of support from all 5 members of the Leavenworth County Commission. This letter supports the provision, the previous version of the property tax cap, which is pretty much identical. I don't know if it's exactly identical, but it's very close, which was in SCR 1611, because it would eliminate the potential yearly spikes in property valuation, capping them at 4%. I testified previously before the House Committee that we are seeing people being squeezed by these tax spikes, and many are literally being threatened with the loss of their ability to own and maintain a home in Kansas because of the increased costs associated with residential real estate taxes. The current system is not working. By far, the most pressing concern to many citizens is property taxes. Residents are willing to pay their fair share. However, property taxes have been ballooning to the point of becoming oppressive. For example, the retired widow on a fixed income who purchased a home in the 80s for $150,000 now finds her property valued at $450,000, and her assessed taxes based on that value are no longer affordable to her on a fixed income. I have heard from many neighbors that the property tax burden may force them out of their homes. This is completely unacceptable. In Leavenworth County, I convened a property tax task force comprised of local residents to discuss these issues and propose solutions to our elected officials. The group discussed transparency in government, the proximity of properties selected for comparable sales, and the need for state and local governments to control their spending. The group specifically endorsed SCR 1611, which included 4% cap on valuation increases for residential and commercial property. It is important to note that, and in my research, I found 26 states had some kind of a cap on property taxes. I know you found 18, but I think it depends how they define it. These states have caps, so this is not unusual. That it's unusual that Kansas hasn't done it because we got a lot of people hurting. While the proposal passed the Kansas Senate, it failed to be considered for a vote on the floor of the Kansas House. I am asking you to support moving this forward, and I will just quickly read the letter from the commissioners. Dear representatives, we write to you to request your support for adoption of SCR 1611, providing relief for excessive and growing burden of residential property taxes to citizens of Leavenworth County and those of the state. It is of paramount interest to us and your constituents. SCR 1611, by capping the increase in assessed valuation on residential properties, in most cases will help prevent our citizens from being taxed out of their homes by ever-rising market prices. SCR 1611 does provide for the adjustment of valuation on residential properties when those properties are sold or improved. In those instances, the homeowner's choice would be the deciding factor in the increase in the valuation of the property, not the engine of comparable sales with no cap on annual increases. Your support of SCR 1611 provides substantial relief and assistance to the citizens of Leavenworth County and the state. Without the cap on valuation increases, the tax burden on our citizens will continue to climb. Taking this opportunity to support SCR 1611 will evidence your support for relief to the homeowners of the state. And I just would say, a lot of people are really hurting. And this is really important. I know the Chiefs is important, and I know these other issues are important, but this is really important. And I don't know if it'll get done in the special session, but let's keep it on the hot burner. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. You put the cap on this. Who's going to pay the tax then? Because I've always envisioned this like a balloon. And when you take and squeeze it down this size, it's got to go somewhere. Don't you have that's one question. Two is, you have the ability to lower your budget. That's where it needs to start. This system is built on true valuation. And when we start tinkering with true valuation, we're pushing this into different areas that I haven't had the time to really investigate. But I think we need to be careful with that, Mike.
I would agree with you that we need to be very careful and consider it. I have a couple points that Senator Tyson mentioned, some proposals to make a couple changes. But I would say this, that over the last 20 years, inflation has averaged below 4%. We're proposing a 4% cap. That would provide plenty of money for revenue for local government, because you're still growing with the 4% cap. You're just capping it at 4%. So we're not. If we were putting an absolute freeze on it at zero and it was frozen, you would be correct that we would have a squeeze on the money part. So that's how I would address that, is that there's going to be plenty of revenue. I mean, probably we don't want government to grow more than 4% a year, do we? I don't know. Probably depends on the inflation. But the other part of it is absolutely we need to control spending on the local level. We've worked on this on the county level, but there is a problem with this for commissioners and different, is that we have so many levels of government. So if we control our spending on the county commission, and the county commission part of your property tax dollar is 24 cents, and the school districts in the county's portion of the property tax is 63 cents, we don't control that 63 cents of the property tax burden. That's 6 or 7 school boards that control that. And then you've got the cities and the townships. So it's a little more difficult than saying that local government should just control it, because it's so dispersed. And that's why I do think there needs to be state action to absolutely cap it, especially the fact that 26 other states have done so.
So I'd like to clarify, we're only limiting the taxable value. The mill levies can still increase. Right. So that local control is complete authority. It's just the taxable value that would be limited. And the actual value is still going to show up on your valuation form that you receive from your local government. You would see the difference of.
And if we weren't able to maintain our roads and bridges and infrastructure with the 4%, we'd have to raise the mill levy.
So Representative Corbett, then Senator Thompson.
Thank you. I have a friend that lives in Tonganoxie, and he's telling me that he's paying on 3 school bonds currently. That seems to be a pretty good hammer to be carrying. And I think if we don't do something, whether this is perfect or not, the 4% will at least give people a chance to budget their life and decide if they can afford to stay here.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, folks, the status quo is not working, and that's the bottom line. So, I mean, we can let it go. We can just keep letting it go, but how many years?
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate your common sense. When we're talking about the valuation increases, for most people, it's unrealized gain to begin with. So there's no guarantee that property, over time, as your house gets older, it needs repairs and things of that nature, that you're ever going to be selling that property for the valuation that the county is coming up with. So just from that standpoint, it seems unfair. I don't think I could sell the property for what mine is valued at, and I've had a 40% increase from what we built it at. I would hope that I would. It would be very nice, but that's out of whack. I mean, over the time that we've been there, that's an average of almost 8% increase. So we're only going to cut it by a half, at least based on my own personal valuations. Any comments on that with regard to the taxation situation? And appreciate your courage and common sense on this.
I think you make a very good point, because this constitutional amendment would shift the way things are done. Currently, you own the home, and now you're getting taxed, and you're not planning to move. When we reverse it, you're going to be capped at 4%, and if you choose to move, then you know that when the property conveys, you go to a new home, you start at a new level, and it's going to be 4%. And one thing I visited with Senator Tyson about, we're not stuck on 4%. If you 3%, but the commission's letter is 4%. But I don't think it's in concrete on that, as long as you can make the numbers come out. But another thing that about this is stability, being able to plan. Like, we've got people in Linwood that had their taxes go up 27% in 1 year. You can't really plan your economic future if you don't know what your taxes are going to be. But if you had a cap, you know every year what your taxes are going to be, where it's going to be at. It's going to not be any higher than the 4%. The system we have right now, it's just wildly out of control.
If I may follow. And if we set it at 4%, it'll be 4% in a lot of counties. Every year, you're going to go up 4%. So that's a guarantee, given the inflation and everything else that's going on. So I hope we can actually bring it down a little bit, but that's my own personal opinion. Thank you.
Well, and Representative Smith, when they had the House committee, he had suggested why locking in at 4%. And so that's where the language came from, that 4% or lower as defined in statute. So, any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mike.
And the one last point is, if the whole property tax system in Kansas could be removed from the Constitution and placed into statute law, when we needed to tweak or adjust the valuation system, we could make it would be a lot easier than to have to go through a constitutional amendment every time.
Yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So, thank you, Mike. Our next conferee, is there anybody else that would like to testify in support? We have Aaron Popalka for opposition. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Aaron Popelka of the Kansas Livestock Association. While I'm appearing here as an opponent of the constitutional amendment, I want to be clear that KLA favors property tax relief. In fact, earlier in the previous hearing was referenced a letter where we supported actual property tax relief. And the direct way to do that is to reduce the statewide mills for the legislature. The reason we don't support this constitutional amendment is because it won't actually reduce property taxes, because taxes are a function of a formula that takes valuation into account, the assessment rate, and the mill levy. Mill levies, except for the statewide mill levy that's set by the legislature, are set by local governments' budgets. So if you cap, let's assume all classes of property increase at 6%, which they don't. Classes vary, and I'll get into that in a minute. Let's assume everyone's capped at 4%, and the local governments set their budgets. The mill levies will simply increase to meet their budgets. So it won't actually deliver relief. Now, the concern we have, and I pulled some data before I came. You can go to PVD's website and look this up. There's a link that is called Valuation Growth Analysis for Real Property by Subclasses. And it shows a comparison between 2020, 2022 and 2023, which are the last years available. And I live in Wabunsee County, and so I pulled that county to look at how did the subclasses change. Well, residential had a 6.32% increase in those years. However, ag was at 1.72, commercial industrial was at 1.54, and other land and buildings at 0.07. So in that scenario, the residential, and I will have a disclaimer, this does include some construction, but in visiting with PVD, I don't think that's more than 1%. I'm sure PVD could probably break out the construction. But if we set it at 4%, residential is going to get capped. And if the cities and counties come in with the same budget, that revenue is going to get pushed on to the other classes that are still at the, like, for instance, ag at 172, industrial at 154. And so you've created this artificial shift off of residential onto other classes of property. Now, what's interesting is there's actually one county where there's a bigger increase in commercial industrial and residential was below 4. So in that scenario, you could actually shift it on to residential. It doesn't occur very often, but it's possible. That's why we don't support this, because at the current moment, if you look at how valuations have adjusted, and I looked at those counties that had increases above 4%, there's about 24 on that PVD website, or what handout on the website. And in those 24 counties, you will see a shift on commercial, industrial, and agriculture if this goes into effect. The other item I'll mention too is we're concerned about how this would affect the use value. Senator Blasey, you are correct. It would not repeal it, but the formula is an automatic formula that's set to measure the income generating capacity of the land. It's an 8-year average of 8-year averages. And so, yes, Madam Chair. So if this goes into effect, the formula runs, and it wasn't too long ago that we had double-digit increases. Our members understood that that's how it worked. It's to level out the peaks and valleys. So this then would cap it, and if we ever got to those increases, let's say above 4%, the formula is no longer working, so it causes a question. Does the legislature now have to go in and repeal it? Do you have separate formulas going at once? We are concerned that could lead to changes in the statutory makeup. But our main concern, again, is that because this doesn't affect the ability of local governments to set their budgets and assess mills, it won't actually stop property tax increases and will likely, in the current environment, cause shifts. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We do have a few questions, but I don't see some of the information that you gave in your testimony. So could you provide that for the committee, the website, and other information?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can forward the link to Eddie, and hopefully he can disseminate if that would work.
That would be great. And some of your math's not in there either. So, committee, any questions? Senator Blasey, then Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So, I mean, Senator Tyson clarified for me that all classes were lumped under this 4% appraisal cap. If we carved out ag to leave them as they are, and the 8% formula stays as statute dictates, would you be comfortable with this amendment?
No. And it goes back to, again, that this would potentially cause shifts in who's assessed at what level, because you're not affecting the ability of local governments to set their budgets, and which sets the mills.
I guess I'm struggling to follow how it's going to shift, because if everyone's 4% and ag's still doing their thing, the 8% ruling, I don't understand how it's going to shift.
Well, in this, I think will prove out when you look at the handout or the link on PVD's website. In certain counties, residential is above the 4%, so that would stay capped. But all the other subclasses are below 4%. So if you're capping one on the valuation side and the others remain the same, you've now created a shift of the burden onto those ones that aren't capped. Because the purpose of the property tax system, whether we like it or not, is to is for appraisers to reflect the true value of the property. And I think we all realize that residential properties have spiked. There's a lot of reasons for that. But that's the way the systems work, is to reflect the true market value. And then it's incumbent on the local governments or the state to then adjust their mill levies and budgets so that they don't increase the property tax burden reflected in those valuations.
On the last paragraph on your testimony, you mentioned capping the increase in appraised value will not prevent higher property taxes because local units of government will adjust mill rates to raise sufficient revenue. I think that's the whole goal of the amendment, that if local governments feel like it's adequate to raise taxes, they'll actually take that vote, have that hearing, and make those decisions publicly. So right now, they're fortunately just riding the wave of appraisal increases, and there's really no true deliberation being taken place to understand whether or not it's a good idea. In Wichita, we have, I think, several hundred, or at one time we had several hundred open vacancies with law enforcement officers, and we have massive spikes in crime the last several years. And so there's been a lot of effort to raise salaries and become competitive to recruit more officers to hopefully turn that tide of crime around, and it's worked. And I think most people in Wichita would agree if we have to raise property taxes to meet that goal, it'd probably be an appropriate goal or appropriate reason to increase taxes. But right now, local governments are just riding that wave of appraisals, and there just doesn't seem to be any true accountability. And in my local county, I know there's a lot of hard conversations happening right now in terms of school closures, in terms of the city trying to fill a massive budget hole. And so I just think, unfortunately, we're going to have to cap the wave.
And Senator, I certainly can't speak for any of the local governments in your district, but I know for 4 years I served on city council, and the revenue neutral rate does hold accountability. When we went in to set our budgets, we always started with that as a guidepost, saying, well, let's figure out where that's at, and then we'd go into each individual department in the city, streets, public safety, water, sewer, and then figure out what we needed. And if we were below that revenue neutral rate, great. If we were over, then we decided, okay, do we really need this? And we have that second budget hearing, or do we figure out how to adjust and get below that? So I do think, again, I can't speak for every city, but I know in the small town where I was on council for 4 years, we did look at that, and I'm proud to say we kept it below that revenue neutral rate for the years I was in service there. And so I do think that is there and is a check. I don't, again, can't speak for every municipality, but many across the state, certainly in rural areas, are looking at that. And so there is that current check.
Senator, I just want to point out that KLA testified and tried to stop the revenue neutral rate legislation from passing. They did not support that either.
Madam Chair, I believe what our testimony said is that we
I have a text where you
supported the property tax lid as a more effective means of controlling it than the revenue neutral rate.
That was your testimony, but I have a text that was sent out to all the House members attempting to kill it. I know that was private. I'm sorry. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to piggyback on Senator Blasey's comments and state it a different way. By allowing the valuation situation to continue as it is, it gives the elected officials plausible deniability. They wash their hands. We didn't raise the mill rate. The valuation just went up. If we put a cap on it and they need to adjust their budgets, then they have to have the responsibility of raising that mill rate. It's fully on them. It's not trying to deflect the responsibility on some opinion of an appraiser. And so this forces them to take the responsibility and say, hey, we got to raise the mill rate a certain amount, and then the taxpayers know what's going on and who's responsible. It's not this deflection of blame. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, Senator, the revenue neutral rate works off a combination of the mill levy and valuation. So currently they can't just deflect it because it's looking at what's the total tax levied in terms of the budget. So I don't think that that's necessarily accurate because, for instance, let's assume you had a valuation cap, but the budgets weren't above the neutral rate anyway. You just, again, I don't think it's, I want to be clear about this. I don't think, we're not arguing against property tax relief. Again, I think the easiest, most direct way to do that is to cut the statewide mills. And that would deliver immediate tax relief to everyone. And that's what we favor, something that delivers it immediately.
Madam Chair, but at the local level, when you have two variables that are unconstrained, the potential for playing with those numbers is much greater than if you constrain one of those numbers, and then the only one that can really fluctuate is the mill levy. Again, it focuses the responsibility on those who are elected and not those who are unelected, like those appraisers who are out there making an opinionated judgment on what a value of a property is. And they are, I know at least in our county, I appealed mine this year. It went up $50,000. I appealed it. They so generously dropped $5,000 off the appraisal. So, and this is happening year after year after year, and everybody I talk to is getting the same thing. And it may be different in rural parts of Kansas, but in Johnson County, it's out of control. And the more we can constrain one of those numbers, the better chance we have of controlling these taxes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Aaron, thank you for your presentation. I guess I'm asking you this from your small town that you worked at. The thing that I'm concerned about is that if you've got a $3 million house and you got a $100,000 house, and you put these caps on both of these, and then the market is going to make one of them go higher or lower, we're worried about the guy that can't pay his taxes. I'm concerned it's going to push it on the lower side of that because somebody has to pay the tax. So I think when we start playing with putting this 4% on everything, the way everything's going to bump up against it, the whole system is built on true valuation. It might not be perfect, but I think they've tried very hard to do the right thing with that. So you might comment on that.
I think that's a good point. I actually, I mentioned Wabunsee County was at 6.32 on a countywide level. I actually went and pulled my actual taxes, the difference, and on my home, it was a difference of around 12.5% increase. And so, yeah, this cap is on the individual properties, not even though it's easier to talk about counties in aggregate. So, very valid point.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for being here today. So, talk to us a little bit about your membership, because this is being presented that this is the position of the Livestock Association. So, did your membership take a vote on this? How did this position get established?
Yes, so Senator, like many organizations, we have an annual meeting every year. Lead up to that annual meeting, we have roundtables, discuss different policy positions, and then at convention, if you're a member and you show up, you cast a vote, much like the legislature. We have committees. We actually have a tax committee, and we have various tax policies that direct what I do as the government affairs employee at the Livestock Association.
So how many of your members are either currently or they have a spouse that serves on a local school board, city council, county commission, something like that?
I haven't taken a poll, but I would suggest probably a good, decent number.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because part of what you had shared was reduction of a statewide tax. Mm-hmm. And where that is impactful is with regard to funding for schools. So was that put in consideration? Was that their choice, was reduce statewide tax, such as the statewide 20 mills for schools, or versus this? How did this come up that this is the position of livestock?
Yes, Senator. Actually, we have a policy directly on point that we favor policies that shift funding of schools away from property taxes and on to other forms of taxation. So that is directly reflected in our policies.
Okay, talk to me a little bit about true valuation, because part of what we see from other testimony is, look at very rural counties, Miami County, Lynn County, Cali County. Miami County in 2 years, residential valuation 37%, Lynn County 44%. So how would you determine true valuation? What do you believe is true valuation?
Well, I'm certainly not an appraiser, but my view is that the job of the appraiser is trying to figure out, based on like-kind sales, what your home would bring on the open market.
But that's the interesting thing, because in the tax committee, we've had discussions about grain elevators. And a grain elevator that might be 20 or 30 years old is being assessed as much as a brand-new elevator. Would you say that a 30-year-old grain elevator has the same value as a brand-new?
That would be a difficult question to answer, depending on the improvements that have been made, the storage capacity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because when we look at, quote, true valuation in a community, in a county, they look at what a home within a neighborhood sold for versus all of the other homes in the neighborhood. And yet, home that just sold might have been completely gutted and remodeled and renovated, where none of the other homes have had that. So you're assuming true value based on what a neighbor's home might have, not what the actual homes have. So address true valuation for us.
Well, I believe, Senator, in those instances, the appraiser should be making adjustments to reflect, they have to start with the sales data, but reflect things that have been done or not been done in a home. And certainly if the legislature wanted to tackle the issue of making sure appraisers are accurately doing their job, we would certainly be in favor of that.
Well, using the example of the grain elevator, there are certain things that could be observed externally as well as an internal evaluation as far as the operation of the grain elevator. But that would be impossible to do with individual residences, wouldn't it? How would you determine that all fixed appliances have been replaced, all carpeting has been replaced, everything has been renovated, let's say, every 10 to 15 years? You wouldn't have anyone that would be able to do that for our neighborhoods, would you?
Well, Senator, again, I would say that I'm not an expert appraiser. I probably defer to PVD to maybe clarify, but I believe, because I've gotten these at my home, appraisers occasionally do questionnaires to ask things like, have you done this, that, or otherwise. Whether or not you answered, I don't know. Maybe there's some other way that they do that. Again, I'm not an expert appraiser. These questions might be better directed to an appraiser or PVD.
Well, I've been a homeowner for more than 40 years. My husband and I have each been homeowners for more than 40 years. I've never once been surveyed on an appraisal, ever. But I can tell you that the information shared here is quite accurate with regard to 37. That's a 37% average for Miami County, average, which means there are those that have had 50% appraisal increases. But I think what's interesting is, the testimony right after yours as far as opposition is that of KASB. And I think not only are they opposed to this current, but I think that they perhaps might be opposed to elimination or reduction of a statewide mill levy. But I think at the heart of the matter is in part not only what we're addressing today, but today we're addressing the opportunity for Kansans to have a say on what would be a part of the Constitution. But what I do know that we have heard, at least in the prior hearing, is that even with elimination of income tax on those that are earning Social Security. Eliminating income tax on Social Security will not make up for the double-digit percentage increases of property tax. So we very really are having our retirees leave the state because they can't afford to stay in the state. So I don't know that just reducing a statewide mill levy, I don't know that that would necessarily make a change. It's interesting. When I used to write the annual report for a community college, we put in the last page of the annual report, the tax dollar. And we broke it out by the different entities. So for every tax dollar that a resident paid, where was it going? Do you know in Johnson County how much money went to the state government out of every tax dollar?
I do not, Senator.
You want to make a guess?
I am not a very good guesser.
It's a penny. A penny. And so when you look at all of the other entities, schools, city, county, water district, fire services, community college, 1 penny went to the state, the rest of it went to the other entities. And I think perhaps if we had more accurate, more transparent explanation of where the components of every tax dollar went, I think that might be illuminating for people, including those that are members of the Livestock Association. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? I do have a couple. So the Senator brought up some good points, and I think I'm going to capitalize on the phrase cap the wave. That was exactly what we're trying to do here. And agriculture enjoys the 8-year moving average with the 2-year delay, and that has capped their wave. That's why that language was implemented. So why would you deny other properties the ability to cap their wave?
Well, the use value formula is not a cap, Senator. It is a formula that takes out the peaks and valleys. And I know the House earlier in the year had a hearing on an amendment that would do something not the same, but have a average of sorts for residential, and we did not weigh into that debate and oppose it. The reason we're opposed to this, again, is because if you have one class property is capped and others that aren't, it will cause a shift if you're not doing anything to stop the local government from enacting their budget authority.
So I'm going to try to figure out what you're saying here, because I listened to your testimony in the House too, and it's conflicting. We are putting this 4% taxable valuation limit, not actual, taxable valuation. So the first variable of the equation would be limited increase across all properties. So how is that forcing an increase on agriculture or commercial or residential? It's across the board.
Because, and this is reflected in the PVD data, in certain counties right now, you have residential, let's say it's at 4%. I know the amendment allows it to vary, but let's say it's at 4%. And you take the county that I mentioned where I live, Wabaunsee, that's over 6%, whereas all the others are below that on the valuation scale. So you would now artificially set residential at 4%, and the rest wouldn't change. And that gets away from the system we have that valuation should reflect the fair market value. And so when the mills are then placed on the overall value, you're
losing all of us, because the initial variable is limited at 4%. There are triggers in the constitutional amendment that would reset those values. And so you're losing all of us. If you could come up with an explanation and email it for the committee, that would be great. And I'll move on to my next question, because I disagree with you. We're limiting it across the board for 4%. And so they can go down, it can be less, but it averages out over time. We've had the graphs, we've had Eddie run the graphs. The main years that you see that this impacts is since COVID, basically. We haven't seen double-digit increases since, like we are seeing since 2020. I mean, Lynn County, 40%, over 40%, just because we got a new appraiser.
And Madam Chair, I 100% agree. If the appraiser's a problem, we would support legislation to hold appraisers accountable for not making sure that their appraisals follow the true market. If that's happening, that is a problem.
So, well, do your members know that you are here testifying against this constitutional amendment?
Senator, yes, they do.
Okay, and they know that you're asking us to not allow voters to decide whether they want this amendment or not?
They know that I am here in furtherance of our policy to not, to advocate against a potential tax shift on agriculture at the current point.
This is not a tax shift to agriculture. I'm in agriculture. That's where a majority of my property is. So do you think I would be advocating to harm my family and my friends with this constitutional amendment?
Senator, I think respectfully we can agree to disagree on this point.
Okay. So you would say that 18 to 26 states have it wrong by limiting valuations?
I don't know the legislation in those other states, so I wouldn't opine on that.
Well, it was modeled after Oregon and Oklahoma and Florida legislation. So you would say that those 3 states have it wrong?
I don't know anything about how those states appraise property, their assessment rates, so I would not opine on that.
They are based on a fair market value. They use different terminology, but it's a very similar system. I would say one comment that you made, I would say I completely disagree with. You said that this is not going to lower property taxes. But then on the other hand, you said that we should lower the state mill. The state has the 20 mil, the 1.5 mil. But what this does do is limit the valuation increases on that 20 mil and that 1.5 mil. And that is actual property tax relief for Kansans. Because if somebody has a 40% increase on 20 mil or 1.5 mil versus a 4% increase, wouldn't you say that's actual property tax relief?
If your valuations are over 4% and the mills don't change, it would, but for agriculture right now, it would not. For commercial and industrial in most counties, it would not. Again, I think actually reducing the mills would provide that relief. But again, getting back to, I think, Senator Baumgartner's point of the state is, I'm not going to say insignificant, but it's small. It would not affect the ability of the local governments to set their budgets and levy mills.
Okay, so last year, Miami County had the highest valuation average, commercial, homeowners, and agriculture, 16.8 or 9%. You're saying that they would not benefit from this 4% valuation limit?
In regard to the 20 mills?
And the 1.5 mil?
Again, I think in a particular year, just talking about statewide mills, the individual taxpayer would see some relief in that scenario. But if you look at the valuation data from PVD, that is not in very many counties.
But you said this was not actual property tax relief, and it is. It can be. So what I would say is, I'm in software, and we have a saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is, and it is your right to come here and testify against, and I'm glad that you, if you have any else to say on it, I know it's not a debate. We're a little bit different format here because we are trying to push this through in one day and hopefully get some relief and some policy change to property tax owners or property owners. So I'll let you have the final word.
I think there's probably been enough said. No need beating the dead horse, so.
Okay. Senator Fagg. The tax still gets paid because the locals have the ability to increase the mill levy. The limit on this would be the growth to constant mill levies that are set. That is where the limit would come in, and they always have the ability to come in and increase the mill levy. This does not stop that at all. And the legislature could come in and increase the 1.5 and the 20 mil. And we've already proven that the 20 mil is over and above where we need to be for statute on school funding. Fag.
So you did a good job, Madam Chairman, on SB 13 with transparency. And so we have our meetings, people come. If all the cities and counties raise their mill levies, what's going to be different with that than what our transparency is doing right now?
So what this does is this helps, that's the overall property tax bill for the county or the governing body. What this does is it addresses individual property tax owners. That's the difference between this. So we heard of, well, I'll use the majority leader, for example. The majority leader in the Senate had a neighbor that remodeled his home and sold it, and approximately $40,000 increase in valuations for all other homeowners that were in that subdivision. They didn't do anything to their home. If this 4% limit was in place or lower, then they would have not have seen that type of increase in 1 year. Now, it would gradually continue to increase until it did meet the actual valuation, but they would not see it jump in 1 year. Senator Thompson.
Yeah, I think I want to clarify something, that this is sort of like somebody saying the inflation is going down when the actual rate of inflation continues to climb. Let's say we had inflation at 8% last year, and this year's at 4%. Inflation is not going down. It's actually gone up an aggregate of 12%. But the rate has gone down. We're not lowering property taxes here. We're still allowing a 4% increase every year. I wish we were dropping it by 4% every year and actually curtailing it. But all we're doing is limiting the growth. So the taxes are still going to get paid, and it still allows for a 4% growth. So I think you have to look at it that way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? We do have one other conferee. It's written only, Leah Filter. Did you want to comment? No. She's the one that would be most impacted by it. I absolutely understand the math there. But it's not that they would not have the ability to increase their funding. It just wouldn't increase through an automatic valuation increase. So committee, we do have neutral testimony. Martha New, would you like to testify? Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you. I'm Martha Smith. I'm with Kansas Manufactured Housing Association, and I do appreciate the opportunity to comment today. We are asking for personal property manufactured homes to be included in the 4% cap on valuations. Currently, under the proposal, real property manufactured homes on permanent foundations are included. But our request would also include all of the personal property manufactured homes that are in mobile home parks. Those are all personal property manufactured homes. Now, I have heard before that personal property manufactured homes do not increase in value. I would tell you that one of my board members last week appeared before BOTA on personal property tax appeal. So they do increase. And so that is why we would like to also be considered under the cap, like other real property. They are homes just like the other residential structures. and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
So thank you, Martha. I've heard this issue, and I apologize, Martha Smith. I knew Smith. So we've heard this issue because of the bankers and the mortgages and all the, it's not new to this committee at all. I'm checking with the revisers to see if it is possible to put a statement in on personal property. So we will research that. I'm not sure before we put the final bill in.
Okay.
To see if that is possible or not.
I did use the term that is found in the Constitution.
Okay.
Which is on page 4. It says mobile homes used for residential purposes. So I don't know if that would help or not, but.
We'll definitely research it and
Okay.
appreciate it. Any questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jay Hall, our next conferee, welcome to he's in the other meeting, isn't he? Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are. All right, thank you, guys. Is there anybody else that would like to testify as an opponent? Probably not an opponent, right? Any neutral? Eddie has just informed me that there's 2 private citizens that have sent in written proponent testimony. Committee, we will distribute that so you have it before tomorrow. Committee, are there any suggested amendments for this resolution? If the committee is acceptable to it, would you mind if we put the language in, if it is feasible for the mobile home resident? Is there any objection? Seeing none, we'll look into that and see if it's a possibility then. Okay, Senator Thompson.
Yeah, I guess my only question is 4% where we'd like to leave it, or would we like to discuss lowering it to 3 or 2%? I don't know.
I'm glad you brought that up, Senator. The language states 4% or lower as defined by statute. So it will be up to the legislature if they want to come in below 4%.
Okay, so that's something that could be adjusted on a yearly basis, basically.
It could,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
I like the flexibility of it not being in the Constitution. That was something Representative Smith had suggested. And so the same thing with the transferability language. I know there was a lobbying group that was, they asked for that language, and instead of trying to get into the details of it and confusing people when they vote, it would just be something that would be defined in statute also. So there is flexibility in this constitutional amendment. Any other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we put a cap on inflation? I'm just being sorry.
I wish. Thank you. That would be awesome. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, you guys, thank you for your patience and everybody who participated. I would draw your attention, the Leavenworth County Commissioners did submit testimony also. So, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is a constitutional amendment being introduced tomorrow based on today's discussion? Or?
It would. Thank you, Senator Blasey. Would you guys like to, how would you like to see that introduced? Oh, Amelia. So it can either be an individual bill or a resolution or with co-sponsors. So if you would like to co-sponsor, will you give your name to Amelia? And that would be with any legislator that would like to co-sponsor it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wanted to thank everybody for bringing ideas. I know property taxes continue to be an issue that we all hear about as we're those of us on the campaign trail. But I just want to give caution to the 20 mil reduction. I think the 1.5, glad to talk about that every day. But 20 mils, I think, as we all know, school finance, property taxes is probably the most secure source of funding, especially when the economy eventually, at one point, I'm sure will go down, and we'll see a recession at some point, which revenues will follow that. And so I think we just want to use caution as we continue to talk about this discussion, how to lower property taxes, because last thing we want to do is be in another school finance litigation due to having to fill another hole because we're reducing it from another bucket. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.